Welcome back to the next session of Streaming Media Connect 2023. I'm your host, Evan Shapiro. I'd like to congratulate Ben in the comments for the funniest guess at song. This panel is best of both worlds, making hybrid events work for all viewers. Before we get into it, I need to remind you that we are giving away a $50 gift card from Amazon to the first person who can, in the chat, name both the tune and the band or this artist behind the song. The first person to announce it and who is here at the end of the session. So there is more incentive to stay to the end of the session in addition to the amazing content of the session itself. So we're all going to stick around, but the first person who names the song and the band correctly in the chat will win a $50 gift card as long as they're here at the end of the session. That also reminds me, put the chat in the chat, put your guesses there. In the chat, you'll see a link to the YouTube page for Streaming Media, where all the sessions from Streaming Media Connect will be next week. You'll also see comments and links to panelists' LinkedIn pages from Steve, our producer. But if you have questions, please save them and put them in the Q&A. That's where the questions, Q, will be answered, A, by the panelists at the end of the session. I want to thank our moderator in advance, Andy Howard from Howard Associates. I want to thank him in advance for an amazing panel. Stick around at the end for the Q&A and for the winner of the contest. With that, I'll turn it over to Andy. Good luck.
Thanks, Evan. Appreciate it. And thanks, everybody, for joining today. This is going to be a great panel. Let me just share my screen here to show you who our panelists are, who can join right in now if they'd like. So we have myself, Andy Howard. I'm the founder and managing director of Howard Associates. Howard Associates is a consulting company that helps organizations implement video communications, so predominantly video streaming and video conferencing. Also work with some startups and also provide strategy advice to vendors. So I've been fortunate to work with a lot of great organizations, specifically on the streaming side with Deloitte and BlackRock and Travelers and Aetna, and basically help them navigate, when they're trying to do a new video initiative, try to figure out the requirements, and then lead them through vendor selection as well as implementation. So let's go around the horn here and introduce the other panelists. So Derrick Freeman from Ohio State University. Derrick, why don't you introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about what you do?
Sure. My name is Derrick Freeman, and I work in the Center for Continuing Medical Education at the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center. And I manage our distance education series, MedNet 21. It's essentially doctors teaching doctors. So essentially what we have is we have viewers that watch in a group setting where they watch all at the same time, our on-demand webcast series. And then we also have online viewers that watch our program. It's about 20 hospitals that subscribe to the program, and we provide all of their CME credit for their physicians.
Great. Anna, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Andy. Hi, everyone. I'm Anna. I'm a freelance producer and director based out of New York City. I started my career in technical production services, working for companies like TalkPoint and LiveX. Last year, I went freelance. So now I'm freelance, mainly working on the agency side, working with agencies, content providers, content creators, to produce hybrid events in the real world. Currently under contract with companies like Happily, Momentum, and the United Nations.
Great. Anthony, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hello, everyone. I am a longtime video producer back before when streaming meant over the air, and have worked on many types of productions, and hybrid being a huge component ever since COVID, where the combining of local audiences and remote audiences, as well as local presenters and remote presenters, obviously has some unique challenges to it. And I have a couple companies locally that I provide services to in consulting. And that's pretty much the focus of what Stream for Us does.
Great, thanks. And last but certainly not least, Ben.
Certainly least. I'm Ben, currently Director of News Technology at Boston 25 News, where I help bridge the gap between the editorial and the engineering departments. We do all sorts of events, actual over-the-air streaming, etc. Prior to that, I worked at the wildly successful CNN Plus for a month while that existed, and I've just done a bunch of stuff in the live streaming remote production spaces.
Great. Okay. So I just wanted to try to frame the discussion here a little bit and talk about, first of all, what is hybrid? So I come from the corporate world. So, for me, a lot of the events are like CEO broadcasts or streaming of sales events or customer events, things like that. So the way that I see hybrid is that there's a couple different definitions. One is that there's hybrid presenters. So, right, it used to be you had the presenter come in to the location, they would deliver the presentation, then there was a production team on site, and then they would stream it out. Now people can do Zoom, get multiple presenters or teams or whatever they use in order to get multiple presenters from different locations into a session, kind of like what we're doing here today, and then stream it out. I think hybrid production is another one that you guys can all probably talk about quite a bit better than I can, where again, the production staff doesn't all need to be in one location, all working, on the same thing, physically located together. They could be in multiple locations. The production could be in the cloud. A lot of different options there. And then hybrid viewers obviously means some amount of viewers are in person, some amount are remote. And I think we are seeing a trend where there's a lot of events that are going in that direction. And then, in terms of, I think what has changed over the pandemic, I think production, like we mentioned, has changed, the management of how you're doing things, as well as the distribution. And then maybe we can talk about some ideas for the future as we go along. So I'm going to go sort of around the horn here and say, what are your definitions of hybrid? And they could very well be different from mine. Derrick, why don't you start?
For me, hybrid is really having those viewers in terms of our webcast series. It's having viewers that watch in a group setting, but also having viewers that watch in a remote online our webcast series. For us, it's also doing our webcasts in a hybrid form where we're doing it remotely. So in those scenarios, we're having presenters that are actually pulled in through Zoom. In the past, in the future, we'll probably use MS Teams live events for our viewers. But it's basically being able to pull all that those presenters into the production remotely. So for us, we're also looking at that as hybrid.
Great. Anna, how about you? Do you have a little bit different of a take on this? Probably.
Yeah, working agency side, it is interesting because I always thought you stream a live event and then you've got your webcast audience. It wasn't until I feel like after COVID, we all started to be like, oh, this is actually different than if I'm just streaming from a studio. And it's also different than if everything's remote, right? There was full remote, and then there's on-prem with the streaming audience, and then there's on-prem with remote talent, with decentralized production, right? It's all hybrid on some level. There's almost, very little of what I find myself doing now is not hybrid. There is no element of crisscrossing between locations in any way, right? Even if I'm doing everything on-prem, I'm probably sending it back to a distribution center that is then doing all the encoding to multiple platforms and all of the streaming piece of it, right? It's all hybrid in some way.
Okay, great. Anthony, how about yourself? What's your take?
Well, like as Anna said, and I've written about this, that I think that hybrid is one of those terms like when HD came out, everything was HD. You get HD glasses, you get an HD toothbrush. And I think hybrid is like a buzzword now. And having done various productions before COVID, before hybrid was a thing, we would have remote presenters. Like Bill Gates is not going to come to your thing, but he might appear remotely on the screen for 10 minutes as part of your show, but it's not hybrid per se. Or, you might have let's just say you're doing a live concert. You have an audience here and it's being shot and streamed to viewers online. That didn't make it hybrid before. And, like we watched, live concerts on ABC all the time. They don't talk about this is a hybrid country awards show. No, there's just audiences in both places. But I think what hybrid really comes in when Andra, crossed her arms is when the remote presenter is asked a question from the local audience and they have to hear it, or when a remote audience member needs to ask a question of somebody who's on stage, then you're crossing those lines. And that's when it becomes, for me, the hybrid challenge in managing bi-directional communications between all four corners. That's when the challenge really starts to step in.
Yeah, that's a great point, because now you're sort of mixing the audiences, right? Instead of you just have the in-person audience and you just have the remote audience, now you're sort of having
right.
Sort of mix of the two.
I've done events where a remote audience member needed to ask a question. Well, the local audience needs to hear the remote audience member when they come up to their virtual microphone. So, and as we said, we have someone switching the cloud environment and I'm switching the local environment going into the cloud. But then when that person's in the cloud environment, I have to switch that into the local environment for everybody to see and hear. Then that's where hybrid really starts to get nasty.
Ben, how about yourself? What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, hybrid is when you have a vehicle that runs off of both gas and sometimes electricity. No, I don't have much to expand on what they all said. It's basically how do you have the best experience for everyone involved, from the people talking at the event to the people watching the event? Nothing that everyone else hasn't said isn't true.
And I think another way to put it, although there isn't that sort of crossover that Anthony was talking about, is, if you go to a sporting event, for example, right, like a big Michigan beating Ohio State in the game, you've got a group of people that are in the stadium, and there's entertainment going on for them. There's music, there's stuff going on the scoreboard, there's all sorts of stuff going on, and then you have the crowd that's watching on TV, and there's a whole variety of different information and entertainment that they're getting that are different from the people in person. But I think the difference is there isn't really that overlap like Anthony was talking about. But those are all great points. Derrick, you had some visuals. Did you want to sort of take us through your environment a little bit more? And
yeah, I can do that. First, if you do have that OSU commencement, the slide of the OSU commencement.
Oh yeah, sure.
I'll kind of piggyback to start there, kind of starting real backwards there, but just to kind of piggyback on what you mentioned first in terms of, you can have an event that's going on, and I'll speak to the OSU commencement. You can have an events going on, and it seems like it's just a normal event. So like in this case with commencement, I actually just recently went to commencement. That's my daughter in the bottom right-hand corner there.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But I went to the commencement, and I went to the arena, and I watched it in person at the arena. I could see the big screen that had the video on the screen, where we could take, pictures of the screen. But you also, at the same time, we were watching in the arena, but there were also online viewers watching the streaming event. So in that case, it was also a hybrid event. So you have two different audiences that they're really catering for, and it allows each audience to really get, what they're looking for. So that's a nice situation. But to go back to the beginning, if you want to go to the first slide of the studio slide. Thank you, Andy. And so this is our studio production. And so we have a nice production. We use WSU Studios, the same folks that do our commencement. And we have our production equipment in our studio. And then on the next slide, this is just a glimpse of what we have for our production in the studio. So we have the production team. They're, controlling the production. They're using robotic cameras. They have PowerPoint. So we're taking the video feed and the PowerPoint into our encoder. We're using MediaSite now, but getting a little ahead of the game to show you what we're going to be doing in the future is we're going to be using the Pearl 2 for our webcast encoding. And then we're going to use the Panopto platform. If everything gets approved, we'll be using that platform for our streaming delivery. And so essentially we'll be able to see slides as well as video, but this is kind of how we're doing our production. We're putting it into our LMS and then allowing folks to be able to watch online, on their own or in a group setting if there are hospitals. We also have a remote production in the next slide here. And this just shows what we're doing remote wise. So I had a tough time during the pandemic because I was using, you see MS Teams live events here, but I was using Zoom. So I was literally, we were literally doing the production and with Zoom, and then I was doing editing, like doing some producing posts and then sending it to an editor at our WSU studios to do the editing. And it was a lot of work. So I'm looking to do away with all that work, but this is our new potential workflow that we'll use. We'll use MS Teams live events, and then we'll tie it into our webcast recorder or encoder Pearl 2, and then use Panopto in the LMS to be able to do delivery. So that's what we're doing for our purposes for our hybrid events where it's in person in a group setting or it's online watching asynchronously our webcast program.
You just taking like HDMI out of the team's computer and plugging it into the encoder? Or?
I haven't gotten that far. It's just a concept right now, but I'll figure out all the specifics. But I do know the Pearl does have some HDMI in. Usually what we'll do is I'm usually getting an SDI feed, and I think the Pearl 2 may be able to also do SDI, from our studio team. So I want to be able to take that in. If not, I'll have some type of converting it to HDMI to get it into the Pearl 2. But that's
you can hire a team of animators to quickly redraw every frame that happens and put that into the encoder.
That's a good idea. Little out of budget, but a great idea. Thanks, Ben.
You got it.
But that's our setup that but like I said, this is just it's a concept right now, and I'll get in and get my hands dirty with figuring out what's what in terms of the specifics once we get approval with our Panopto platform. That's the real key for all of this.
Great. All right. That's great from a technical side. Does anybody else sort of want to chime in about their setup or how they typically do things? And then we've got a couple questions that are coming in that I think are more focused on engagement, so we can get into that topic. But why don't we talk more?
Yeah, I see the one question. I see the one question on engagement, and I think that bears to like kind of what I was saying with regards to when I think of hybrid, you have to think of, does the presenter know the remote audience is there?
Right.
In terms of polls and chats and prize, drawings and things like that. That's where you have that engagement that crosses the barrier. That's what makes it hybrid when I work on things. Like one of the events that I was working on was a church function. So you had local people, you had remote people, but anybody had to be able to ask a question. And part of it also has to go to instructing your local presenters that they need to wait for remote people to be able to type something in the question and answer column, because they're so used to having just local people in front of them. And they say, any questions, raise a hand. Okay, we're moving on. It's like, no. You have to wait at least like 10 seconds so that somebody can move their cursor over to the Q&A, type in a question and have it pop up, because unless you're aware of the remote audience and give them time, that's what makes it a hybrid event. You have to like recognize that they're there, give them time to do that, to get that feedback from a remote audience. So yeah, we actually did voting. So with local people counting hands and then remote people through a poll, combine those two results to see if a motion passes. So that is really integrating your local and remote audiences, as opposed to just a broadcast where I'm sending out the information and whether they're there or not, engaged or not, I have no idea. So that's why I consider like a difference between a hybrid event is I'm getting feedback from the audience. I have to, allocate attention to them. And I've done events, say I have a clip here. I've done events where we actually have like a team of people sitting on the side, just, 5 people there, just taking in feedback from the audience, pushing polls, customer support people. I can't, where's the Q&A tab, things like that. And, without those people there addressing the needs of the remote audience, you're going to lose that audience, very quickly. So that's where, I find hybrid, has a lot of challenges in terms of having, local producers, remote producers. I had somebody, whereas here's one. This is a guy, this person is a producer who is just literally onboarding the remote presenters. So they call in, hey, let me see your camera. Can you tilt your camera down? Can you close that window behind you? Give me a talking. Okay, you're going to be on in 15 minutes. But this is during the show. So we've got to have people paying attention to the remote presenters before they actually come on too. So it works in all those directions.
Yeah, touching on that a little bit, Beth has a question too, like what is the fear and risk factor on opening up live questions? I think that question, because she's also asking about latency, meant to ask, has anybody done audio question and answer as opposed to text, or video question and answer, and what are the risks there? Because to me, it seems like people have been doing that forever, right? You have a talk show and people call in and they screen them and then they put them through. I mean, obviously in the sort of live event space, it's more of a newer concept, but I think it adds an incredible amount of audience engagement. So Ben or Anna, do you have any experience? And then we get back to you, Anthony, because it sounds like you definitely do.
Yeah, well, so when I was at CNN Plus, the show I worked on was a completely interactive show where we had audience questions. Something I learned in that process is that a lot of people ask a lot of the same questions, but also depending on the kind of your event, you're not necessarily getting, if you have 1,000 people watching your event, you're not getting 1,000 people interacting. If you're lucky, you're getting 100 in that kind of event, probably less, depending on the kind of event. So I think with good moderation, you can kind of generalize the questions more. You could find, people who ask that specific question, attribute it to them. If you have a chance to bring them on, great. But, people aren't necessarily meant to be on camera all the time. People don't have experience being on camera, and they could ramble on and on asking or answering a question, which I'm doing right now. But, interaction is great when you have it planned out and you have good people involved. But I don't think everything needs to be like the extreme, let's get as many people on as much as possible, because it could just take away from the event sometimes.
Yeah.
Everyone else is going to disagree.
To bounce off of that, I've done live Q&A with remote participants over audio and over video, but usually they're in a closed environment, right, for an internal corporate event. When you have a major brand that you're working for and they're doing brand development and it's external facing, you tend to be very protective of what you're spitting out, right? So ultimately those would be, I almost always coach that we pre-tape the questions and then we push them out if you're doing something like that, because this is a wild card. And particularly when you have a multi-billion-dollar brand that you're representing, you have to be protective, right? And it's live. It's live. There's no backsies, right? Which talk shows have always been taping these things. To go off of what Ben said, right? Not everybody's meant to be on camera, but a lot of people are willing to send you something hyper curated now, right? There's this big influx of interest with vendors like Kissway. where audience can participate by sending a selfie or a GIF or a quick message, and then it's funneled through a third-party platform that you then pipe into the stream, and that can be really rewarding because there's time to curate and to fix it up and to pick out the duds before it hits your audience. And I think that's really rewarding, and it gives people, right, ultimately we all are influencers now, right? Everybody wants to be on camera, everybody wants to be a part of the story, and you can give them that reward without accepting a lot of the risk and responsibility of taking internet rando and putting them out to your audience.
Right.
Also, read the names out loud. Like if you're moderating, read the names out loud of the people submitting questions, because there are gonna be some dumb, jokey ones in there, and they always got on there. It's hilarious, but people come up with smart names to try to get through for your host to say, be careful. Dover is not a real last name if your first name is Ben.
Yeah, and to echo what they said, I agree. It's always been curation. You go to a sports event, they're going to point the cameras at the audience, but there's a producer in the control room who's moderating what shots are actually going to make it onto the big screens. It's always been that way, whether it be call in or whatever. So, and as Anna says, if it's internal, there's less moderation because, even if it's just some worker at another facility, their question is valid. And if they were to stand up in the room, they're presenting themselves the same way. So there's less of an issue in terms of bringing them onto the screen. When we did our show, we had people in the AirMeet platform, and they could ask their question in the Q&A. And then if the questions would be moderated by someone we had as part of the program and say, okay, that is a really good question, let's bring them on. And then we would invite them onto the platform. If it was a simple question or a technical procedural question, we would instead answer the question in the Q&A forum, and that would be the end of that. We didn't need to bring everybody who had a question up onto the screen, but we had the opportunity, if somebody had a clear issue that needed to be put out and laid out in front of everyone, we could do that. And, in work that I've done for GM Financial, we kind of did the same thing. They were using Teams, and, remote people in Teams now can be put side by side with our local presenter within Teams itself. So you don't actually need hardware or software to do that anymore. But at the same time, somebody's fielding those questions and then letting them know, listen, we want to bring you up so that you can ask that question in front of everybody. Because the people in the room are not reading the comments. So there's value to having them ask that question verbally in front of everyone, as opposed to just, well, they typed it in the comments and it was answered in the comments. Yeah, the 100 people in the room didn't see it.
Yeah, Derrick, how about you? Do you do questions and answers, and how do you do it?
We do. We actually use a moderator that is the moderator for the program. Our moderator they'll have some canned questions, a couple of canned questions that they'll do. The moderator essentially will kind of provide an overview of the program and how everything works. But during the Q&A, they'll ask those questions, or they may drop a lot of the questions. So for our presentation, we'll usually have around 22-minute presentations. We have to be like an hour long. So we have to get to at least no more than an hour, but at least 52 minutes. And so the moderator, usually mainly at the end, will decide on which questions he'll ask the guests. So if we end up running out of time, we'll kill some questions, but usually there's some canned questions in there. So they're not audience questions, but they're mainly questions that the moderator has thought up that might be a good adjunct to the presentation for the presenters.
Sure. And I want to get back to we touched on this a little bit, but a question from Wasim Ahmad. And the question is, how do you tackle the engagement on hybrid events? Is it as important as it would be in a pure virtual or on-prem event? So from my perspective, I think you need to do more engagement with the remote audience, because the people that are coming on site have already kind of made a commitment that, I'm going to the event. Maybe I paid for it. Maybe it's it's my time, it's my travel, whatever. I'm going to this event in person, so I am relatively engaged already. Whereas the online audience, you can, I'm sure everybody's done this. You can sign up for 1 million online webinars and then go to like a tenth of them that you sign up for. At least that's the way I do it. So I feel like it's much more important to really up the engagement with the remote audience. I don't know what other people think about that. Anna, how about you? Because seems like you're heavily involved in this now.
Yeah, I mean, I think both deserve your time and attention, right? It's one of the things I talk to my clients a lot about is how many lives does your content have, right? Particularly when you're doing brand development, right? You're producing content out there to be a thought leader in your industry and have more inbound or better relationships within the industry. You want a certain amount of traction around your event. So for your on-prem experience, you have to, because they drove in their car to this location, right? They're spending their day doing this, right? You kind of have to reward that. And I would say do it with experiential elements, give them a photo opportunity, good food and beverage, an ability to exchange contact information freely and well, to reward that on-prem engagement. And then that will circulate online, right? Everybody's an influencer now. Everybody wants to take their picture in front of the step and repeat, but that's also going to elevate your brand when those people are sharing your content, right? That's how you get the most integration, the most bang for your buck on location. And then think the same way with your streaming audience. You have to reward attendance. You have to give them the ability to engage, but you also can give them ways to share out what they're doing, to promote it as part of their brand as well, so that you end up with the brand association and you capture the audience of the audience of your audience. And yeah, that can be done with sizzles, it really starts in promotion, right? Promote that you're attending this thing, give your attendees the ability to promote, give them assets to say that I'm going to this thing, I want to see you there, even if it's virtual. But think about content in like how many lives and how long is it going to echo on the internet and return, and engagement is like number one piece, but you have to think about both.
Yeah, that's great points. Anybody else care to comment on that?
Talking about engagement, just a real quick thing. The reason why the organization that I was working with, it's a church, was using AirMeet was because they actually designed it for engagement. So before the actual seminar began, there's like this open area and they had pictures of little tables and it would show you who's sitting at each table. And it's like, oh, there's Jack. I haven't seen Jack in a while. You could sit down at the virtual table and it would pop up a mini Zoom where you could have a conversation with Jack like you were in the lobby of a real physical space. And that was one of the things that they really loved. Then they would have a fellowship part, which was in the middle of the meeting, we're going to break for an hour. And then there was another whole room where all of the sponsors had tables and they had videos and literature where you could go to between the tables. And if you clicked on one of their tables, you could talk with those representatives as if it was a real physical thing. Because at the actual physical event, there was the same thing going on. That same vendor was there with the same tables, with the same literature, and okay, not the same people because the person can't talk virtually and online, but they had representatives there. So we tried our best to create an environment whereby it was the same experience and the people could attend and, hey, give me a follow-up, send me more information, about that. And I also worked with a sports organization that in terms of engagement, you come to the seminar, but if you paid a little extra, you can get an autograph. And each person would come through this little portal and they could talk with a sports person. Hey, I really love your stuff and everything. Can you make it out to Mickey? Sure. Mickey. And he's like autographing a digital photo of himself to Mickey. And then that gets sent to them as a JPEG. So they get a keepsake. They got to talk with Mickey, hey, I went to the same school as you or whatever. So there's that interaction that you're rewarding the remote audience as if they actually got to talk to the person at the table in front of them.
So you're saying there is now a digital version of no one wanting to sit at a table with me?
No, not at all.
Wonderful.
Ben, how about from your perspective? What do you think? I mean, obviously a little bit different with being in the news industry, but
I'm having a hard time hearing.
everybody else hear me?
Yeah, I hear you fine.
I can hear you.
One sec, I have to rejoin my.
All right, why don't we go,
computer.
Derrick, why don't we jump over to you for a sec?
I'm sorry. Ask the question again, Andy.
Oh, it's talking about engagement. How do you think about engagement for the in-person audience versus the virtual audience? And
For-
in your case, maybe it's not any different.
Yeah, for us, it's really not that different. I mean, we for our audience that's in person, we probably have more engagement with the online audience, because anyone that completes the program, let's say when they get their certificate, they'll get an opportunity to evaluate the program. So our engagement may be connected with, being able to allow them to do an evaluation. The remote audience will get it, but it'll come sometime later. But once the individuals that watch online, they can actually take a test to earn their CME credit, they'll get an opportunity to provide feedback, provide information, and to complete an evaluation about the program. So that's one of the benefits of doing online versus in person. But in person will get it. It'll just come sometime later, because someone has to physically give them the CME credit, and then that triggers through our LMS opportunity for them to evaluate.
Yeah. So from my perspective, I feel like there's different reasons why you would go to an in-person event versus watching it online. And I did a lot of these sessions during COVID, and I saw a lot of different examples of people trying to do like a virtual trade show, or have these networking roundtable opportunities. I personally did not like it at all. So in my perspective, and streaming media has been doing this for years, right? They have the stream media shows where you would go in person, you pay money, you're flying there, you're traveling there, and there's great networking opportunities. And that's really why, a big part of the reason why I would go to those shows is because you can get in front of people, there's happy hours, there's other types of events, and that's a huge piece of it, versus the online piece, which for me mostly was about education and trying to keep up with my knowledge during COVID, rather than I did do some of these networking things, and you end up talking to somebody that you don't really want to talk to, and it's kind of awkward to get out of that conversation. And I don't know, that's just my perspective. But Ben, are you back?
I am back. It's connected to my stupid phone internet and got all stupid.
Okay.
Remind me of the question one more time. Sorry.
It's sort of the engagement of in-person versus virtual.
Yeah, I don't know if this exactly answers the question, but I've seen a trend lately. Especially because of COVID, everything being online, everything being easily recorded, things have been like super duper widely available. I've been seeing a trend towards events that only last for a certain period of time, either in person or remotely, where that stuff is never going to be seen again, or so they say. So it creates a need to be there in the moment within the period. Maybe they'll only leave those recordings up for a day or a week. So it helps people to be more engaged. So it might have a life forever if you choose to open it up, but if you can keep people contained in a certain spot, they might feel like they're getting more value, something that they could only get by being a part of the event, kind of with everyone else.
So we have another question here from Isaac Shem. How often do you bring online meeting type features like text, chat, and polls into a physical space? What considerations are there? I've seen this happen very successfully using like technologies like Poll Anywhere or something like that, where actually the functionality that's being used is the same for the people in person and for the people remote. So it allows you to get really a good overview of what everybody's thinking, without saying, well, there's two different groups here that are thinking different things. I don't know if other people have used similar technologies, but Slido is another one. I think that works pretty well. But I don't know, Anthony, have you used any stuff that you like? I think you're muted.
Yeah, I've done hybrid events where we have had used the big screen behind us for word clouds and things like that, so people can like type in something and and they make it part like they gamify it. Tell us the topics you're interested in. Within this this interview with the mayor. And it's streamed online, it's streamed locally, but everybody is contributing to that word cloud that's up top. Or there's a Q&A, there's a moderator, but the Q&A is not coming from the audience, it's coming from this online system that anybody can type in a thing. Plus, many people say, oh, I have that question too, and it gets upvoted, and you'll see questions scoot their way up the thing, and it says, oh, looks like I got to ask this question next. What's your favorite dog?
Right.
Silly things like that. But that's what got upvoted because the audience controlled it, but in a controlled way. We could see it happen. There's a moderator, so that if it's very off color or something like that, they could just kill it. But in terms of driving content and involving the audience, again, that's where that back and forth comes from. You're involving both the remote and the local audience the same way, on that second screen, saying, hey, listen, type it in, upvote it. You can all see it here. It's part of the stream. You all see it behind them. Let's all get involved with that.
How about you, Derrick? Are you guys doing anything specific with that? Or do you just use the sort of standard polling and Q&A stuff?
Yeah, we just use a lot of the standard polling and Q&A. So within our video platform or streaming platform, our moderator will usually have different points within the webcast where they'll encourage people to send in messages or send in questions or make comments or present topics for our upcoming season. So we'll do it that way, but we'll also do a survey that they can complete for our needs assessment process where they can give topics for the upcoming season. But that's usually we promote it on our webcast, but we also have it listed on our LMS.
And how about you from a sort of a brand building perspective? Are there good tools that you've used or?
Yeah, I think the others covered it really well. I've seen it done. I've done it. I think it's almost essential. I think that's like the magic of hybrid, right? When everybody comes together and all of a sudden, it starts to feel really big when everyone can kind of interact. And I think audiences expect it now. I think I was on this panel in like 2020, 2021, and we were having a very different conversation about like, how do we do remote production, right? Now is the time to play, right? Now is playtime with hybrid and remote production, where it should be all about gamification. It should be all about the opportunities that hybrid awards us, right? About making the show feel bigger, right? One of the ones I talked about is where audiences can contribute photos and GIFs and selfies, and they can all be a part of the show. And what's fun is your in-room audience is going to use that to reveal parts of the experience that they're seeing, if maybe they're in the pit or they're way in the back, right? What their experience is like. And then that can go on a screen and it can go on the live stream, and that the at-home audience has a peek into what's happening in the room. But then the same way, people are at home and they're sending photos of themselves, and it sort of reveals how big your audience is, how diverse they are, how they're in different places, they're experiencing different things, they're at home with their kids, their pets, or they're on vacation, right? And you're seeing these beautiful locations. I think that's the fun, right? Now we get to play with hybrid, and it should be fun.
Yeah, I saw that actually when I was watching something from Zoomtopia last year. They had the big in-person event and all the people there, and then the person was on stage with a giant screen behind them, and all the remote participants could put a screenshot. I don't know if it was video or screenshot or whatever, and then they would just sort of randomly choose them, so there'd be like little bubbles flying around with the remote people that were sort of supposed to be there at the event. I found it quite distracting actually, but like you said, you got to try some different things and see what works, because there is an opportunity to experiment a little bit here.
Yeah, and again, you know, like as I said before, it's making sure that everybody knows the scope. You know, as Anna says, you know, that the local audience knows that there is a remote audience and everything. You know, remember during COVID with the NBA games, they tried something with teams that you could have everybody in the teams room sit with like seats behind them, like they're all watching the game, and they would put that, you know, side by, you know, so after a score, they'd cut to the team shot, and you'd have people cheering at home and things like that. And I think it helps as long as you said, it's not overused and it becomes very heavily relied on, but it can, you know, people feel, hey, that was me on the screen, just as if they cut to them in the actual stadium, except my stadium is now at home. So it really does involve them. But let's see, Frank, I'm looking at one of Frank's questions. How do you deal with the latency for remote contributors and controlling live mics looping back down the remote return? That's something that we have to deal with a lot when we do our live fully hybrid shows. And the answer is basically here. I got this right here. The answer is basically you have a team of people. There's somebody running audio. There's somebody, you know, the people are either have in-ear monitors so that we could have the audio going directly to them, because there was a time when we were doing these things and the presenters were in the studio. So, you know, they just had in-ear monitors. But then when they're in the actual church and they were on stage, well, we fed the audio into the room so that everybody could hear it. But at the same time, the audio operator is then turning down the microphone. So they're doing a mix minus, but they're doing it with two sliders. And you need somebody who is skilled, understands what's going on, and is really on the ball to make that work properly and not have that loop back problem.
Hybrid events cannot rely on like your random nephew who like used a microphone once. You need these teams, you need these crews, you need the experience. These are full-on productions. It's not just like, we could probably make this work.
I 100% agree. I was going to actually bring that up too. I had a client recently and they wanted to do an event, and it sounded pretty simple at first, but then it was like, no, we want to have 300 people in person, and it's going to be outside on like the 25th floor of this building. And we're also going to pump it into the Zoom webinar and send it out. And they're like, we're just going to get some mics off of Amazon and that should work, right? And I was like, no, no, that is not going to work at all. So it turned out we ended up hiring HB Live, who's a, you know, production company here in Connecticut, to come and down do it, and it was phenomenal. You know, thank goodness we did that, because it would have been an absolute disaster, and it would have been a disaster both for the in-person and for the remote people, because the in-person audio you wouldn't have been able to hear anything, and then for the remote, it would have had that feedback and things like that. So that's a great question.
To piggyback off of that, an anonymous attendee, because Ben said to read the name.
Yeah.
Hey panel, great discussion. One of the challenges I see is embracing adoption of the functions by on-air talent and or executives for corporate events. How do you pitch or overcome their hesitancy and embrace the potential? That is something that we had to do quite a bit with some of the work that I did with GM Financial. And I basically say the answer is you slowly work through it. Don't spring it on people. You know, you have like a small little, you know, half-hour thing. Okay, and you're going to hear it in your monitor, or you're going to see the question on the monitor. You walk through it. You do a rehearsal. You do something where they do it, but it's not even going out to the audience. We're just practicing, because not everybody is great on camera. And, you know, executives may be great executives, horrible on camera talent, but great executives. And we're asking them to like hear something in their ear and speak confidently and look in the right direction. And that's hard. And, you know, we can't expect these people to suddenly become, you know, news anchors. So we have to like, you know, work with them to make sure that, you know, what the experience that we're delivering is really making them look good and worthwhile to the audience.
Yeah, 100%. I remember way back in the day, probably 2004, we had an executive at the company I was working for, and we were just getting into doing webcasting. And, you know, this person, if you had them in person, they could deliver a presentation to 10,000 people, and it would be incredible. And, you know, great presenter, sat in front of the camera, and it was like, you know, deer in the headlights. just totally froze, and so we had to do a lot of trial runs with that person. Then they sort of got it. I think that's maybe a little less common nowadays because people have been in front of a camera so much the last few years, but I still think it is. Yeah, you need to really educate the people about the technology that they're going to be using without overwhelming them. Don't tell them every bell and whistle that you have. Yeah, dribs and drabs.
A bit at a time.
All right, we have about 9 minutes left, it looks like.
There's a question for Ben in the webinar chat.
I think that's a question for the person named Ben Jeanette and not me personally.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I can try and answer that. It says, have you tried using the audio channels as secondary communications path between on-site and off-site presenters? Have you tried Discord or some of these other tasks? I have to say we've probably used everything. We used Unity intercom, cloud intercoms to communicate between crews. But then we've also used Zoom, we've used Slack, we've used Discord, we've used a phone call, we've used text messages. It's like a back channel can be anything, as long as it works, because depending upon the presenter, it's sort of like, listen, just send me a text message as to what the question you want me answered is. Okay, that's the channel we'll use.
All right, well, so there was one question about SRT, and I think there's another question that's kind of hard for me to keep up with everything on the chat and the Q&A, but about SRT and NDI, how much are you guys using or not using those types of tools in your production? Derrick, why don't you start off? You're on mute.
I'm not using any AI or NDI in my setup. Sorry about that. I was responding to some questions.
Ben, how about you? Because I'm sure you have a lot of remote contribution type things. How do you end up doing that?
Yeah, I mean, there's different protocols that are right for the different kind of tools. I currently work at a more traditional broadcaster, and everything we do is traditional video, traditional SDI. We have cables, and if we need to send a final stream, maybe that'll go out over SRT. But point-to-point SRT is a great way to do point-to-point video, low latency, reliable. It just depends on the right tool for the right job. NDI is great computer to computer as well. It's great in the cloud. But it could get expensive if you're doing like cloud production, you need to send all these signals through. That can start to get expensive. If you already have the equipment, you don't necessarily need to be, transmitting video if it's all local. It depends on what's right for the project.
Yeah, I think it depends on where you're going from and whether there's already, certain cabling that's in place that, because I've asked a few clients, like, why don't you just go with, do some sort of, AV over IP technology, and they're like, well, we already have the wiring, so why would we not use the SDI? I was like, well, that's a good point.
The cheapest equipment is the equipment you already have.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so we have about 5 more minutes here. I wanted to let everybody sort of give a little bit of analysis of sort of where do we go from here? What are some thoughts or exciting things you have coming down the pipe or want to experiment with, or just final thoughts? Derrick, why don't you kick us off?
I think for me, like some of my interest is, being able to embrace the Panopto platform and see what capabilities are there with a new tool. I'm excited to use something new to see, what can be possible with it, as well as using the Pearl 2, for encoding and seeing how that can enhance our productions. I'm excited. I saw some feedback in the chat about being able to use some features of Teams. So I'm excited about what's possible with that for our future with webcast streaming.
Good. Anna, how about yourself?
Yeah. I think if we're still looking at hybrid as like a thing we have to do because of whatever, then we're missing the point. It's an amazing opportunity, and the opportunities that really come are interactivity, gamification, but also accessibility, right? Once you have an online audience, there's a million different ways you can distribute that feed in a way that more people can get to it, but also people who wouldn't normally be able to. And I'm not just talking about locationally, I'm talking about ASL, audio description, closed captioning, and translation, right? There's this amazing opportunity to offer your content to people through hybrid production. And if you're looking at it as an obstacle instead of an opportunity, then you're missing viewers and eyeballs. So that's what's got me excited for the next couple of years.
Very good. Ben, how about you?
Yeah, I think Anna mentioned earlier that we're past the COVID, like, hey, let's get everything together and hope it works, and just getting through the production. We're kind of in the mature stage of a lot of these technologies now and people's understanding of them. So I think now that we have that solid base, I think we're going to be able to just work with the platforms better. People understand what they need better for the long term, not just for like the emergency of, hey, we just need to do this thing and still make the money for the conference that we need to make our company still work. So I think the technology is going to mature a little bit more, but we know all the tools now. There's some slight improvements, but we all know how to do this. It's not, it's not out of anyone's realm of opportunity.
Right. Anthony, how about you?
Well, there's an article in Streaming Media about the pendulum, in that, we were all on-prem, and then COVID happened, and then we swung all the way over the other way, and everything was remote, and, everything was online. And now it feels like, 2023 kind of swung the other way, and it says, no, we got to get people back into the seats. We have to have it local. We are deliberately not going to stream it because we want people to have that, together experience. But I think hopefully the pendulum swings back the other way, and like Anna says, people realize that hopefully opened the eyes of a lot of higher up people that says, oh wait, we could quadruple our audience if we had an online component, if we had it in 2 languages, if we had ASL and captioning and other stuff, or people who can't make it can now attend online. People who are so far away and can't afford that. Well, I can't afford the $1,000 conference ticket, but if I just select 5 things, I can do $250, because these are just the conferences I want. I don't have to buy the whole thing. There's an opportunity that, it takes some mind opening, but if they, choose to see the potential, the real opportunity to some of these things to explode is, it's like viral video, except it's, you can reach more minds this way, easier, cheaper, faster.
Yeah, I agree. And my perspective is, I like to see the interactivity increase. I know we talked a little bit about having people call in via video and things like that. I think there's going to be more and more of that. And then, of course, we didn't really get into it here, and I know Beth asked a question about it. About AI. I'm sure there's new AI technologies that are going to help revolutionize the space as well. There was an excellent session on that yesterday, and I'm sure that'll be online on the YouTube page here in a few days. But so if you missed that, you might want to go back and watch that if you're really interested in the AI. I think Ben was on that panel, and that was fantastic. So thank you, everybody, panelists, audience, great questions. I like the fact that this was, very interactive, and thanks again for attending. Enjoy the rest of the show, and we'll see you soon. I'm going to kick it back over to Evan.
Great job, Andy. Great job, panelists. Thank you, everybody. Really quickly, before I let everybody go, thank you for sticking around for the panel, and thank you especially to Blaze Coyle, great name, who won our contest. The walk-up music, I went full screen there on Zoom and I lost my script. I apologize for that. The walk-up music was Rent Party by Booker T. Jones. Blaze Coyle is our winner, the first person who put it in the chat, who's still here. Streaming Media Connect will reach out to you via email about that card, Blaze. Thank you again to your panelists for that amazing panel and the great content. Stick around or come back actually at 2:30 for Tech Talk with Michelle Munson from Alluvio. That's at 2:30. And remember, all of the panels and all the talks from Streaming Media Connect will be up on their YouTube channel next week. That link is in the chat. We'll see you a little bit later this afternoon. Thanks again.
Thanks, everybody.